Hello, I'm Simon, one of the elders here at Bethel Church Albury, and over the last 5 weeks we've looked at both the journey of how God grows our faith and the individual phases of faith that He takes us through in order to bring our faith to maturity. And we've been working out of Rick Warren's series, Everything is Possible with God, understanding the 6 phases of faith. And in week 1 I gave a brief overview of the entire journey before we looked in detail over the weeks with the first phase on week 2, which was dreams. And John there reminded us that as well as us having dreams for our life, God has a dream for our life too. In week 3, if you remember, we were in-house and Helen took us through the decisions process, which is the second phase in the faith journey. And that's the phase that actually brings a dream to life. Mary followed up in week 4 with the third phase, which was delays. And she reminded us that although delays aren't popular with today's society, it's still a crucial instrument that God uses to perfect our faith. All of these, by the way, begin with D. And last week, week 5, Helen brought us the 4th phase, which was holding on to our faith through difficulties. And this week, we'll be taking 2 phases together. We're going to look at the last phase, which is Deliverance, phase 6, victory and breakthrough. But before we get to that, we've got to deal with the 5th phase, which is dead ends. So the title of this talk is called From Dead Ends to Deliverance. Now, God will always include a dead end phase in the faith journey just before we get to the breakthrough. And ultimately, that's to teach us not to rely on our own strength and ability, but on His. Listen to what the Apostle Paul learnt when he was at his wit's end. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the trouble we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. And during this talk, I want us to look at 2 dead-end examples in the Bible, one from the Old Testament and one from the New, and also going to give you a personal experience, just to remind us that this faith journey is one that we go on often from time to time. It's not a one-time thing, and that's the only way our faith is kept fit. After all, no runner becomes fit after one run, do they? But by regular exercise and gradual building of strength and wise pacing and experience over the phases of a run and over different types of courses and so on. And remember, we're not talking here about the faith journey of salvation. That was sorted when we came to Christ, but rather it's a faith journey that lays hold of a God-inspired dream, goal, or promise, and one that brings us up to a higher level of maturity so that we can handle all that God longs to give us. Now, right at the start of the series, we considered the question, how is our faith? Sometimes we can have a good time faith that motors along just fine until a hurdle comes. Or we can have what I call a 999 faith that shows up in an emergency but fades when all is good, just like the children of Israel in the wilderness years. Remember, the faith that pleases God is a type that stays the course and has been perfected by Him at each phase. Remember what Hebrews 11 verse 6 says, no one can please God without faith. Whoever comes to God must have faith that He exists and rewards those who seek Him. Let me paraphrase that second section further. Without mature faith, the kind that makes it through each phase to the breakthrough, we will not reach the stage where God can give us everything He's been longing to give us. That's the kind of faith that Jesus was referring to when He said, if you have faith, you will receive whatever things you ask in prayer. Now, Jesus wasn't talking here about believing hard enough and you'll get it. Rather, when your faith is proven mature, you'll be in that place where God can give you all that is long for you to have in his will. Now, let's turn to the Bible and look at some examples of how God uses the dead end phase in the faith journey in order to perfect our faith. And we'll start in the Old Testament with an account that many of you know well, and that's the crossing of the Red Sea. God gave a dream to Israel even before it was a nation, which he shared with his friend Abraham, the father of that nation, that his people one day would multiply and live in a land that they could call their own, not having to move anymore from place to place. They would live at peace, and they'll be able to plant and harvest what they planted and more. And many generations later, having multiplied and gone through many delays and difficulties, including 400 years being slaves in the land of Egypt, they were finally on the way to the promised land, the land of dreams. But that journey hits a dead end. You see, the Egyptians had let them go, and they had a change of heart, and they sent their military out in order to bring them back to be slaves again. And this is what it says in Exodus. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? What have you done to us?" There are 5 questions here. Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, "Leave us alone, let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." Now, I call that a dead end. There's no natural way out. Now, in hindsight, we know what happens next, but if you were there, you could never have called what happened next. And this is what happens next. But Moses told the people, "Do not be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the water so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea on dry ground." And the account goes on to say how Moses led the entire nation through the heart of the Red Sea on dry ground, not mud, with a wall of water to the left and the right of them. But when the Egyptian military tried to follow them, the whole army was drowned. So this wasn't shallow water we're talking about. It's enough water to drown the entire Egyptian military. Now, God had taken this company of people through many dead-end phases to deliverance, making them ready to inherit all that he had for them and their children. We know that because it says in Deuteronomy 8 verse 3, in a roundabout way, that God allowed dead-end phases. And that was to teach them that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Now let's jump to the New Testament and to an account recorded in John's Gospel, chapter 21. Jesus' disciples had been on a 3.5-year journey with him that appeared to have come to a dead end when he was crucified. But after 3 days, he appeared physically alive many times over a 40-day period, not only to family, friends and his disciples, but at one time to more than 500 people at once. But when you read between the lines, there were times in between those appearances where his disciples thought, well, now what? And in the section we're going to have a look at now, we see that some decided to return to what they knew best, and that was fishing. This is what it says. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "Welcome too," they all said. So they went out into the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but his disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw your net on the right-hand side of the boat and you'll get some." So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." So what can we learn from this reading? Better still, what did it mean to his disciples? Well, first, that sign was a dead giveaway to the disciples as to who it was that was standing on the shore. And see, Jesus had used this sign to point them to who he is when he first called them to be his disciples. And secondly, I believe it's to remind them and us that in the faith journeys that will follow, not to rely or trust in their own skill, ability or experience, but in God, who is able to bring something out of nothing. I know many of you know this scripture by heart, Proverbs 3 verse 5 and 6, that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your way." See, whenever you hit a dead-end phase in the faith journey and you just haven't got a clue what to do, consider this. God may be inviting you to front row seats to see him at work close up. And it's the stuff that stories and testimonies are made of. And it's also a gateway to the final phase, which is deliverance. So stay with it. And to quote Jesus in Luke 18, he says, "The things that are impossible with people are possible with God." You see, people can only work with what they already have. You see, even in our advances in genetic engineering and genetic modification and artificial intelligence, they all involve rearranging or working with data that's already there. But Hebrews 11:3 tells us that God formed all there is from nothing. See, he doesn't need a leg up. And that's why our faith will never be perfected by hoping for things we can see or just simply get ourselves. For who hopes for what they can see, the Bible tells us? Rather, by hoping for those God-inspired dreams, goals and promises that are out of reach, but with faith in God, become possible. Yet at the same time, faith faces reality. It actually admits, yes, I am stuck. Yes, I can't do this alone. Yes, I am at my wit's end. There's a great psalm, Psalm 107, and it's full of real people with real wit's end, dead end circumstances, and some are there through fault of their own. And yet facing reality, they call out to God for help and he delivers them. And more than that, he teaches them the right way. So it's not just a 999 faith. Now, I'd read this psalm as a comfort if you find you're at this stage in your faith journey. Now, remember me saying at the start of this talk that these faith journeys are ones that we all go on from time to time. I'm going to share with you one of mine. And it's a bit uncomfortable, so bear with me. Because not all faith journeys are grand-scale, mountain-moving, earth-shaking revival experiences. Sometimes they're just personal, everyday stuff. I remember entering a spiral debt that began as a youth from the time I left home and got my own place, and it stayed with me into a good portion of my adult life. And it wasn't through expensive living or lavish holidays. There just always seemed to be too much month left at the end of the money. And all I seemed to be doing was servicing debt. And whenever I reached the dead end, I did all I knew how to do, and that was to consolidate, to pay the debt off with more debt. And it was good for a while because it brought you more time. But all I was really doing was kicking a can down the road and digging a deeper and deeper pit. And my giving was little to non-existence. After all, I thought, well, I need that money to service my debt. And little did I know that as a result of that choice and attitude, all that I earned, I seemed to be putting in bags with holes in them. That's a nod to that great chapter in Haggai chapter 2, isn't it? The car would always cost more than it should at the MOT. Major white goods were breaking down left, right and centre. The boiler would fail time after time in the winter. Now, I know these things happen in every household, but it was the frequency, the cost and the timing of it all. The final straw was when, as a musician, I had to put some of my instruments on eBay in order to pay the groceries. And at that point, I turned the corner and realised I was definitely in a dead end and I couldn't kick the can down the road anymore. And I had a simple dream. I remember thinking, and I believe to this day that that dream was God inspired. I dreamt to be out of debt, to be giving, to be living within my means, and to have some left over. And I knew at this stage God was saying that was my dream for you too. Now, faith faces realities, and that sometimes begins with honest prayer. Now remember, to bring a dream to life, you have to make a quality decision. So next I set about getting professional help and advice, and that led to a plan which I stuck to, and I knew it was going to be a long journey. And during the early stages of that plan, I set aside a portion of my tithe, but not the whole tithe. It was just baby steps. And I continued to work hard and stick to the plan year after year, and I could start to see signs of a dam breaking. I mean, I remember the items I was selling on eBay were fetching surprisingly higher amounts than I expected. And do you remember the very start of the PPI scandal? It was at that time that one of my PPI claims came through, and that really helped. And then I was able to set aside my whole tithe each month. And this went on for years. Not long after that, I began to enjoy a streak of success at work as a sales service rep. Now, I hasten to say here that I know better than those I work alongside. I'm no more skilled than them. I'm just putting it down to God blessing the work of my hands. And with the money made in that period, I lumped it against the debt till one day one of my biggest debts was confirmed paid. I remember thinking that was just such a huge weight off my shoulders, and that was after 5 years I was both now giving and I broke even each month. And the success continued at work until after 6 years every debt was paid off with the exception of the mortgage. I was now giving, in a habit of saving up for what I wanted, living within my means and having some left over. And what's more, the instruments that I sold on eBay, little by little over the years, I was able to replace them with better ones and more besides, such as I needed. I don't ever want to go on that journey again. There's a saying we have, don't we? Don't waste your sorrows. While you're down there, you might as well learn all you can. You see, if God had sent a fat check right at the beginning of that journey, I would never have learnt what I know now. And I thank God for every decision, delay, difficulty, dead end in that dream, because for me, it brought about deliverance. That's all it is right there, isn't it? So these are the phases that God uses to build our faith. They all begin with D. I want to share in closing this series some D's to look out for that are opponents to our faith, and God will never use these to build your faith, so they should be seen as enemy tactics. And they are doubting his word, that's the first D. Disobedience to his word. Both of those first two is an old trick that Adam and Eve fell to, doubting God's word and then disobeying him. But there's always a nod to Genesis in my talks. Distraction. Remember Pharaoh's army? When Israel looked up and they saw the army approaching, they could have been distracted by all what was going on. So don't be distracted. Denial. That's saying God can't when he can. And discouragement, that's another big one. I think of Numbers 13 when the 12 spies went in to spy out the land and 10 of them brought a bad report and discouraged the whole company of Israel, and that led to the destruction of a whole generation. That's the 60, which I haven't put there, 60s, destruction. Now to close, I'm not going to pray because I believe that God is constantly working on our faith. Instead, I'm going to leave you with the words of Jesus that puts the ball firmly in our courts in John 13, verse 17. Now that you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. God bless the rest of your day.